This is Mark Tech going live. I hope I'm actually being live because last video OBS wasn't working how I wanted it to. This is going to be a meme on this freaking channel with me and OBS. I don't know, like I'm waiting the appropriate like 7 seconds or something. It still doesn't want to do it. That's why I started the stream a little earlier. At this point, it should be fine for me to say, hello, this is Mark Tech going live. This is Mark Tech going to, I don't want to talk about myself in the third person for too long, but this is me covering a very interesting topic and potentially very important one. It's going to really depend on what exactly is going to happen. Like there are always rumors that are a little weird in that they are based on the truth, right? Maybe they have some logistical information. Let me go back from OBS. This view must be completely terrible for all of you. But from time to time, there are rumors where good analysts, people with solid prediction records, they make assumptions based on production, logistics, on things they have heard from people working in production, in marketing maybe. And it's all about, well, can Apple produce enough of what they want to produce for the time they want to launch the product at? And the interesting thing about that is those people can be technically true and their data basically can be correct. But what can happen is that basically there are some last minute fixes to the production, to the logistics that improve everything. There can be some there can be just Apple like maybe being overly cautious in the background. Maybe demand won't actually be as high as some predicted, so some supply shortages will not actually be that severe. However, we do see a little more than usual. The last time we've actually had a concrete delay was with the iPhone 12 lineup. In this case, it seems that we might see something a little similar. And the primary culprit seems to be the display of the Pro displays. And we have a couple of articles here that I wanted to talk about. Those articles talk about the iPhone 15's potential delays. I wanted to very quickly gloss over some features that have recently came up as potential features for the iPhone 15, or, and that's going to be the last point, they might be features for the iPhone 16. And if the iPhone 15 already has had some, let's say, downgrades in comparison to some of the rumors that we've had. For example, very early on we expected it to have a larger main sensor. We expected it to have like those haptic buttons. We expected it to have maybe even some kind of like Thunderbolt capability. On that we still aren't sure. We know that it will be USB-C. We know that it will probably charge faster. But also recently we have gotten like battery rumors, whether it be about like raw displays, raw battery size, or maybe like even some changes to how the battery chemistry and technology actually works. And so what is interesting here, I'm sorry, I don't know why, like it seems like my stream isn't going live, is it? Like, or is it, isn't like my internet slow on my iPad? Okay, it's working, thank God. I was just a little confused by how long it was buffering. So we've had some rumors that point towards some things being more interesting about the iPhone 15 than we expected, and some less so. And some of the things that have recently come out, like the bigger battery size, or maybe even just a different battery that would be more dense, would give more energy and everything else like that, there's some reason to believe that those features might only come with the iPhone 16. And with that, there's obviously a reason to now discuss if the iPhone 15 gets delayed, at least the 15 Pro, should you maybe wait for the 16? So those will be basically the three topics of this video: the potential delay, the overall rumors that we've had of the iPhone 15 and some of the recent changes, and what it potentially means for the iPhone 16. So let's get fully started now that I know that the tech works and now that we do know what we are going to talk about. As always, a big thank you to 95Mac, Mac Rumors, every similar website that aggregates rumors like this. Again, I could be talking like this just full screen. I'm not trying to take away clicks or anything from like those websites. I do believe that they understand that themselves. I do primarily use them as a background and as a reference point. So yeah, if anybody says that like my content is like too derivative, I usually just read out 1 or 2 sentences and then I provide my 2 cents here. So okay, so basically there's like a big ad right integrated into it. It's from The Information, which again, it's not really something that I would just jump in and believe right away. But okay, there are some also different rumors pointing towards that direction. I still would love to see somebody like Ross Young, who actually seems to have a firm grasp of the iPhone's supply lineup in terms of display. If he can confirm that those issues are actually real and they're actually impactful, and what it's all going to look like in a couple of weeks and months, because believe it or not, we are now only 2 months away from the launch of the iPhone 15, or at least the introduction. So they're saying that Apple is using a new manufacturing process for the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max display. So part of that is them having dramatically slimmer bezels around the displays, and how much that specifically impacts like the base process that is being used, I cannot say in this regard. I'm not super familiar with like low injection pressure overmolding or LIPO. That seems to, the process involves Apple fusing the display into its metal shell prior to assembly. Apple is repeatedly tweaking the design of LG's display so that it can pass the test. So it definitely seems to be some kind of like basically area compression technology, so that the display and the elements like the controller and everything else like it don't take up as much space. Again, I'm not super familiar with the technology. What it basically comes down to is Apple has a new display technology, a manufacturing technology for the display. We don't yet know how that will impact everything from like efficiency, heat dissipation, everything else like that. And Samsung doesn't seem to have any problems with it. It's sometimes people say that like Apple's display are basically just Samsung displays repurposed. That is not true. Similar to, that's just like saying that every processor on TSMC's 5 nanometer node is the same. That isn't to say though that Apple does as much customization to their displays in comparison to Samsung as they do to their core processing architecture. However, there are from the very beginning, in the way that Apple has folded their screens, that was very specialized tech for them, because folding obviously with OLED was always possible, but Apple was always very, very rigid about the quality control on those issues. Burn-in mitigation, Apple has always been more hardcore than Samsung. The way that they've rounded out the corners, Apple was always very specific in their implementation. That isn't to say that all those things by themselves were impossible on regular OLEDs, and in fact many of those things came before Apple implemented them, but Apple tried to do it as high quality as possible. And up until this day, I would say that Apple never has really shipped like a cheap OLED panel. Granted, all of their devices are pretty expensive, but we have seen OLED panels being pushed out as like 120 hertz, so it cannot really maintain 120 hertz that well. We have seen them pushed out at like 1000 nits of brightness, but then only deliver like 600 nits. Everything that Apple advertises for their OLED panels basically is true. With the peak brightness, the contrast, and even like their long-term resilience has always been like pretty impressive, while all those early OLED panels that I've seen, including from my devices and from devices in my family and friends groups, is that the Galaxy S8, the Galaxy S9, especially like even when you go below the Galaxy S7, those OLED displays really either had like completely unrealistic colors, a ton of burn-in over a very short period of time, very inconsistent brightness levels. So again, I'm not trying to excuse this as like saying, oh, Apple is like shipping the most revolutionary screen and that's why it's now delayed. No, but Apple is known to push technology still forward. So if somebody asks, oh, why can Apple not do like even thinner bezels without that? Well, the iPhone 15 Pro is supposed to have the slimmest flat bezels of any phone on the industry. And even before that, there's still also things to think about, like accidental touch inputs. If you basically have like no bezels whatsoever, shatter impact if your device drops and lands on the side slightly on the screen. There's basically nothing in between the actual screen and now the metal band. So there's a lot that Apple does throughout the whole device manufacturing to mitigate risks, and this is a new technology that seems Samsung has largely mastered, while LG, a secondary supplier to Apple's premium OLED displays, and definitely is known to be like more delayed or have like slightly lower output quality. So apparently LG definitely isn't quite up to par yet. Apple is reportedly unlikely to delay the launch of the iPhone 15 and 15 Pro Max. So that brings us basically to the title of the video, of the iPhone 15 being delayed and Apple being potentially in trouble. Now, we won't see an official delay. What we likely will see is some kind of paper launch that would still happen in September, but just in limited quantities. To anybody who like follows like PC hardware, you know what paper launch is over the last couple of years, in terms of like if you wanted to buy like a GeForce 30 series GPU, they launched and then they were sold out, and then you couldn't get anything for months unless you were like paying 2 to 3x to scalpers. So this is definitely not quite what will happen here, and maybe Apple will space out the 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max launch from the regular 15 and 15 Plus, but overall it seems the most likely scenario is that the 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max are launching pretty much simultaneously with the others, but in very limited quantities. Yes, so we did have another basically delay prediction that was analyst based, so not quite like logistics impacted as we think. Well, obviously that Bank of America analyst did base his delay prediction on his understanding of like logistics and production capacity, but his primary focus was to line up the financial impact of that delay. He points back to the iPhone 12 delay in 2020, where it was his prediction that the 12 lineup will have some kind of delays, and that obviously came true with the 12 and the 12 Pro shipped to customers on October 23rd, and the Mini and Pro Max models shipping in November 13th. So that was a very late launch by Apple standards, which usually tries to ship iPhones in September and at the very latest in October. So this was the one time where we actually had to wait until November, and this was actually the reason why I didn't buy the 12 series, because I really wanted the 12 Pro Max for the best camera, and I was at that point still running on the XS Max. And when I saw that it would basically come out 2 months later and it wouldn't have technologies like ProMotion that I really wanted, that's when I decided I would just wait another year. At that point, it would just be 10 months instead of a full year to get the 13 Pro, and that's what I did. So, to this analyst, however, he is saying that there will likely be a real delay of a few weeks. So maybe we will see some spacing between the regular 15 and the 15 Pro. So he raises price target on Apple shares, so he still believes that Apple is still a good company. He noted concerns that iPhone sales for the fiscal year of 2020 of September 2023 could miss consensus estimates. This is basically him focusing on like, yeah, so Apple would make like 4.5 billion fewer dollars. Obviously not a gigantic impact. Well, it's a gigantic amount of money, but not percentage wise. And it's also still money that Apple would most likely get back, quote unquote, with like more with like future quarters, because it's unlikely that such a short delay would actually kill the demand long term, especially for a device that is potentially as exciting as the iPhone 15, where we've had some gigantic capacities to be expected in the next iPhone, and now we seem to have either an explanation for it, or maybe it's disconnected but still very exciting. And in summary, it's basically that the iPhone 15 would use stacked battery technology, which could increase energy density, prolong the lifespan of the device. This was originally set to launch with the Galaxy S24 Plus and the S24 Ultra models. Man, the regular S24, like the regular S, basically non-Plus, non-Ultra model, gets like so shorted every year. It gets like worse and worse in comparison. It feels more akin to like their flips now than it does to their flagships. That really sucks, because we do have phones like the Asus Zenfone 10, and which is like really exciting. There's a lot of like high-end technology in a smaller phone. And yes, I understand you cannot, for example, always ship like the largest main sensor, or like even like periscope zoom or anything else like that. But it is definitely a bummer that you aren't getting even something like a more dense battery technology, because the phone that would most benefit from it would be the S24, less so than the S24 and S24 Plus and Ultra, which already have huge batteries inside. So just for short, I know that this would be like a very nerdy aspect. Stacked battery cell uses a manufacturing technique called lamination. The elements and separators are folded into zigzag layers instead of being rolled up. Anybody of you who knows like even like a traditional like round battery, like it's easy to imagine that the layers of everything inside are like rolled up together inside, but still, even with like a somewhat flat battery, that's kind of how you should imagine it, even though it's like not perfectly round, obviously, as a circle. But this would be like zigzaggy. It would be like more like rectangular inside, which obviously utilizes the space which in the phone, which isn't circular by itself. It utilizes the space much better inside the actual like battery chassis, and the battery chassis form is obviously impacted by the actual smartphone. So there's less wasted space and more active material can be included, so there's a greater overall capacity, which is also very interesting, because you now also have to imagine that there is now more like surface area, because there's like so much stuff like zigged and zagged against each other. So that can actually help with cooling, and that's why, based on that, there's also a rumor that Apple could include 40-watt wire charging and 20-watt wireless charging via MagSafe. It's interesting because we have seen rumors that Apple would support like 15-watt charging with Qi 2, like the standard that they've also helped develop, that also includes like basically the same magnetic lineup as the regular MagSafe. So Apple would basically be supporting an open technology better than ever before, while simultaneously also making their own charging technology, their more proprietary charging technology, better for themselves. So it's a typical Apple move, and it's actually something I'm inclined to believe. If you actually look at it in comparison, right now we have like peak wire chargings of 29 watts on the 14 Pro Max, and MagSafe only charges at 15 watts. That would actually come up to a very nice like 33% speed improvement for both, and I think that could legitimately be as fast as people need it to be in any kind of scenario. I've always been an opponent of like 100 watt, 120 watt charging on smartphones. Even if my phone could do it, I would never enable it unless I would be forced, unless there wouldn't be an option to like half the charging speed. But I think you can go up to 50 watts and still get a really nice boost to like peak charging. I would still probably prefer to like cap it at like 30 watts and then maybe only enable 50 watts in extreme scenarios where I really need a quick charge. Maybe I only have a few minutes to charge and then I have to go basically do my stuff throughout the day. But I do believe that this would be a valuable addition, since it also, with better thermals, could also enable better longevity as well. So this could be a win-win-win, or even if it doesn't increase capacity or cooling overall, its higher density could still result in like a smaller battery, potentially a lighter one. But since there isn't much to be said about the actual battery chemistry, and this is more like basically a battery arrangement kind of deal, so even if it could be denser volumetrically, it might not be denser in terms of weight, so that there won't be any weight gains over the previous generation, or to be more precise, a weight loss. However, again, I haven't seen those kinds of batteries yet in actual use, certainly not on a smartphone, so that would be a very interesting addition that also could like justify, if you would have to wait a little longer, like a couple of weeks to get like the best kind of battery life on any iPhone, and the rumors that I've covered point to like 15% more capacity or something like that, I believe a lot of people would gladly take it. And this seems to apply to the entire iPhone 15 lineup and not just the Pros, which would be absolutely phenomenal. But again, we do not know. Sometimes rumors are very imprecise when it comes to that. They will talk about either the full lineup or only one device, and then fundamentally we don't fully know, right? Like there were rumors like a while ago that assumed that like basically the Pro Max devices would always have like superior cameras, but then they aligned again. And then we've had like rumors in the opposite, that the Pro Max and the Pro would not get different like zoom cameras, but now everything is pointing towards the 15 Pro Max having the periscope zoom camera, but the 15 Pro not having it. So there are some discrepancies here that are very interesting, and those do depend sometimes on just what is available in what capacity. Apple creates like more high-end devices than almost every other manufacturer combined to a degree. Like Samsung is the only one that comes even close, and then you could like add to that all the Xiaomi Ultras and all the other high-end devices, and still probably not fully match the output of the Pro and Pro Max together. So this was just the most recent rumor. Everything else is like pretty clear at this point, so this is just a very small overview. basically the iPhone 15 lineup as a whole, but we are always talking about the Pros more specifically, because I do believe those are the more interesting devices, and in recent years they have been outselling the non-Pros. Some rumors about the non-Pros are not always as clear about the Pros. It seems like the logistics people and the analysts are also more interested in the Pros. So there's obviously the A17 chip. We've had some rumors pointing towards that A17 will actually be a larger jump than many expect. I would actually be inclined to believe it, and not just based on it using 3 nanometer, but also in terms of GPU performance specifically. I would point towards the A16, basically not improving GPU performance almost whatsoever over the 5-core A15 version. However, it also has like 50% more bandwidth. So there definitely is, as soon as Apple puts in more compute power into the GPU, as soon as Apple enables technologies like ray tracing, which again, I might not be a super big fan of like using ray tracing in games on the phone, but I do believe that just in GPU architecture that supports ray tracing is fundamentally more exciting. As I've pointed out, there's a periscope lens, which should be about like 5 to 6x optical zoom. It seems to be that everything points towards us actually losing this 3x zoom on the Pro Max, and that is kind of a disappointed. I have always been very vocal that like around 4x is probably my most used zoom range, which means currently I just use the 3x optical zoom and then a little bit of digital zoom. Like 5x, yes, it's fine if you need to zoom in exactly 5x, and then you get like even better quality than if you were coming from a 3x system. However, what if what you're zooming in is like 4.5x away, and now you basically have completely garbage quality if you still want to capture that as like in a slightly wider field of view, basically. That kind of sucks. I would love to have several zoom cameras, maybe like Samsung does it, but Samsung really starts cheaping out on their zoom cameras to the point that like sometimes you're just better off just using the main camera and zooming in. That's also, by the way, true for Apple partially. So I really am not sure where this is going, and there's a new rumor here that will point towards the next generation, but we'll get to that a little later. So USB-C seems to be pretty much confirmed, quote unquote, as confirmed as something can be right now in the current stage of the basically not having had a presentation from Apple directly. But that is obviously a big selling point, and it's something that is necessary if they want to, like, obviously the law comes into effect a year later in the EU, but they want to just be ready for it no matter what. Everything else, we will have like Wi-Fi 6E, an X70 modem from Qualcomm, which will be like the most efficient yet, and iPhones in recent years have had some like of the best cellular connectivity, so that is quite great. There will even be like a new UWB chip, which is designed to work better with Apple Vision Pro. So there's a lot of stuff that might not be as apparent as it seems, but maybe changes that are specifically designed for a new era of Apple's ecosystem. Who knows, at some point maybe UWB will be like a legitimate replacement for Bluetooth. Who knows? So there's a lot that will be going into the iPhone 15 that isn't necessarily as flashy as like USB-C and everything else. And of course, my favorite still remains the design. The design is on the basically the 15 and the 15 Plus would basically inherit a lot of the design from the 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max, with the dynamic island and the slightly thinner bezels over the regular 14s. And then the 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max would have like slightly rounded glass on the back for more comfort, a potential titanium chassis. This is like the Apple Watch Ultra for reference. difference, how titanium could look like. And of course the titanium itself would also contribute to like a more durable and or lighter chassis. I think it would go into both. And the other major design change for the front, which also harbors back to like the display manufacturing rumor we've talked about, that the iPhone 15 Pro bezels are expected to measure in at 1.55 millimeters, which would break the record for the thinnest bezels in a smartphone. The 14 Pro, for comparison, has 2.17, and the 14 and 14 Plus actually have even slightly larger ones than that. The actual display size, however, seems to be the same at 6.1 and 6.7 inches, and it seems to be like we still aren't getting any kind of higher refresh rate. I'm not even talking about promotion. Promotion by itself is more about than just higher refresh rate. It's primarily about variable refresh rate that also enables like higher efficiency. This doesn't seem to be the case. According to Ross Young, we will be getting like a full LTPO iPhone lineup in 2025 from everything that we have seen. So this is basically this was a small recap of the iPhone 15 together with the latest rumor about like stacked batteries. But let's go to the iPhone 16. Now, if the iPhone 15 is only delayed by a few weeks, that's not a bad thing, right? I've pointed out that it took me basically to reconsider buying the 12 Pro Max because of a 2-month later launch than expected, right? Instead of September, or like no, it came in November, and even instead of October, like the 12 and 12 Pro, it launched a full month later than that. So in this case, I don't think that anybody should reconsider buying the 15 Pro because of a delay. However, in terms of feature set, there is a good argument to be made that maybe you should wait for the 16 Pro if maybe all the improvements on the 15 aren't quite as impressive as you wanted them to be. One thing seems to be the super telephoto camera. Now, the super telephoto camera would offer increased optical zoom, which would be very interesting because it is kind of an insane zoom at 300 millimeter focal length. Just to comparison, the currently what we are calling a 3x zoom is 77 millimeter. This would be 4 times more, so we are talking like 10 to 12x. It would depend obviously like what the 1x is. Maybe they also change slightly the focal length on the main camera, but yeah, it's pretty an insane jump to what we currently have, and it would likely be like 2 times further in terms of focal length than what we will be getting on the 15 Pro Max. Again, we still haven't had any kind of details about it. We've had like sayings that it would be like a 5 or 6x zoom, and it would actually line up really well towards this being double. What are my 2 cents basically here? I don't want this. If this is the only zoom camera on the 16 Pro Max, that to me is trash. What could save this? It's the technology that LG and Sony have displayed and that LG is already using, and that is variable optical zoom. Basically that it would have like a range where it could still offer real optical zoom, maybe down to like 6x and then up to like 10 or even 12x. That to me would be phenomenal, and if Apple keeps on improving the main camera, maybe like 2 or especially 3x might not be as important as it once was, and 2x will be completely taken over by like using 12 megapixels of an overall 48 megapixel sensor. However, if we just have one non-adjustable optical zoom at 10x, I don't see any kind of utility in that. I'm sorry. Like, I know that Samsung had like their crazy space zooms. Their crazy space zooms were still based, I believe, on like primarily like 5x zooms, and then like a lot of like digital post processing. But then they also used to still have more zoom than they currently have, because it was crazy and they really wanted to show off the periscope arrangements. I do hope that this does adjust. Like, people are saying super telephoto are often used for sports and wild animal photography. Sorry, I'm not taking pics of lions and have to stand so far away from them that the picture is still good. Like, yes, sports events, but what can you do with like a 10x zoom that you wouldn't be able to do with like a 6x zoom and like a decent digital zoom on top? Like, come on, just use a larger sensor or whatever you want. Make the one zoom camera that you have better. Maybe Apple would have like several zoom cameras then, maybe like a 4x and a 10x. But now we are talking about even larger camera bumps, taking up even more space from the actual like other components like the batteries, the antennas and everything else. I don't want this if this is like the most simplistic implementation. If this is similar to what LG and Sony have shown off, then I'm on board. Then I'm really on board. I want to have like, ideally I would have like an optical zoom between like 3x and 10x. Ideally the main camera would go for like from 1x to 10x, but obviously that just in terms of physics is like nigh impossible to implement. However, we are seeing a lot of new innovation in zoom tech, and I am happy that we'll be getting more. But I don't want Apple to just say we have the furthest sharp zoom on a smartphone. That's just not what I think most smartphone photography looks like. Next point is about the sensor size. I've actually covered this to a degree. It seems to be now pretty much confirmed, if we are going to reuse that term, which is that the current 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max use a 1 by 1.28 inch sensor, and it would go down to a 1 by 1.14 inches. It would go up, that is a size increase, to in the 16 Pro Max. Whether it would be also in the 16 Pro remains to be seen. There doesn't seem to be a sensor size increase expected for this year's 15 Pro Max. So what I think what could still happen is like maybe the 16 Pro would then still keep like this size, and then like the 16 Pro Max would have this size, and then maybe a year later the 17 Pro inherits like the 1 by 1.4, and then maybe the 17 Pro Max has a full like 1 by 1 inches, so a full 1 inch sensor basically. That would be interesting. Again, I've been somebody who expected a sensor size increase. That isn't to say that I still wouldn't buy it without, because it's still a larger sensor than on my 13 Pro Max, and it would likely also come with like huge computational improvements in the image signal processor with the A17, which is not actually something that we've seen a lot in the A16. The A16 is basically using all its improved capabilities to just go from 12 to 48 megapixels. In terms of like dramatic changes to HDR or anything else like that, we aren't actually seeing that over the 13 Pro. And interestingly enough is that we have had rumors that that kind of sensor, that larger sensor, would be a newer Sony sensor that specifically is designed to improve HDR. So I do hope that Apple still manages to put some kind of software level or firmware level improvements that make even a sensor that is just as large in the 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max still be much better than on the 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max. They will likely have more RAM to work with, more cache, a faster overall processor, so there is some kind of improvement coming beyond just the sensor size. But if you were really looking for a phone with like a much larger main camera, then you are likely going to have to wait that extra year. A larger sensor could improve the dynamic range, background blur, etc., and of course low light photography. That is all true. However, we've also had like a lot of years where the iPhone was like stuck in at like basically the same sensor size, and we still saw like big improvements that were based on computational differences. So maybe this will be that. In fact, the kind of like year-to-year improvements in main sensor size that we have seen over the last like 4 to 5 years are actually quite atypical for Apple. So this is basically us going a little bit back to the norm, and this would also keep it would help keep the camera bump a little bit in check. And the last rumor of the iPhone 16 that I wanted to cover is larger displays. And those displays would actually be primarily taller and not necessarily wider. We would go from 6.1 inches to 6.3 and from 6.7 to 6.9. And interestingly enough, we do see those rumors from Minchi Kuo and the Twitter leaker Unknowns21. So those are actually very reliable leakers in that regard. So this is actually like, you have to imagine, and I did cover that again when we've talked originally about larger displays, is that how it would potentially impact the dynamic island. Because unless Apple puts like the dynamic island percentage-wise further down, then that, which they won't, that means now that the dynamic island stretches less further into the screen, which means if you're watching like 2x1 content or even wider content, it will less likely be impacted by the dynamic island, especially on the Pros. The Pro Max are already mostly fine. Again, there is some overlap with 2x1 content, but it's not severe. While on the regular Pros, it's actually quite meaningful. It's quite bad, if you want to call it that. So I think that improvement would actually be a really nice one, because if the phone isn't getting wider, then that means that the phone is getting a little taller, which means it has a lot more space for extra battery, those extra camera changes that we've outlined, while still being just as comfortable to hold. And now some would say, well, it will be now even more difficult to reach like the top of the screen with your thumb. Well, guess what? It's already pretty much impossible. You already have to rely on reachability, but it's better to have a slightly taller screen, I believe. It would basically get now closer to like a full 21:9. It's currently 19.5:9. So it would be even more immersive, quote unquote. Again, it's still a phone display. If you would be watching some kind of movie or anything. But to me, this would be nice. I know some people don't want even larger screens. Ironically, I think this would be really good to anybody who really wants like a large phone, but to whom 6.7 was like too large, and 6.9 will likely be completely impossible to wield. I think those people could now more comfortably actually save $100 and go towards the 6.1 inch model, which now becomes the 6.3 inch model. Now your videos on that screen are less impacted by the dynamic island, and you have a tiny bit more space, so you have to do less scrolling and everything else like that, I believed. And now you have a phone that is dramatically more comfortable to use than any previous 6.7, or for the most part even like previous 6.5 inch devices. So I do believe that there's something to look forward to here, and I do hope that Apple actually makes it true, that this doesn't just becomes a rumor that gets lost in the ether. So that's basically it. I know I'm sorry for the nature of this stream. I wanted to stream yesterday. I've also heard that most of you wanted me to stream yesterday, but I've had some personal stuff to deal with, and I do have like a different time schedule for today, so I'm streaming right now. Basically, what have we seen? Well, we are seeing that don't expect like long weeks or especially months of iPhone delays, but maybe expect an iPhone 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max to be introduced, and to maybe like launch maybe 2 weeks or so later than the regular 15, or if they launch still simultaneously, then expect to have very little supply until like the end of the year, like the holiday season. That would be my prediction, maybe even a little later on. That would also still be impacted through things like 3nm supply. So while we are talking about displays here, there are still other components that might further down the road impact iPhone availability, especially on the Pro and Pro Max, which are using the latest processors. And I've already in a previous video covered how the pricing changes of the 3nm supply might actually be working to the benefit of Apple, because the actual yields are low, which could still be bad for supply. So what is good for Apple isn't always good for us consumers. So again, yeah, this is basically the balance of those rumors, right? Maybe some small actual delays, but definitely some kind of shortages, which we should all be pretty used by now. Overall, I think the 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max are still stacking up to be very exciting upgrades, and I think anybody who really wants to upgrade their lineup to be fully USB-C, this will be definitely worth getting. I think we definitely have had far less exciting updates, and to be getting pretty exciting updates like now 16 years into the existing of the iPhone, again the first iPhone with its 2007 introduction, I do believe is a big win for the community. I don't think that this is something to necessarily like die for because of the hype, but I do believe that this will be a good offer for most people. This does obviously flow together with everything from like the design changes towards like more recent rumors like a potentially much better battery. However, if you are a little on the fence of buying this year, then be told that there are some things to look forward to if you will skip this year. Basically, the 16 Pro might inherit some things that were supposedly cancelled for the 15 Pro, like those haptic buttons. Definitely, if like the iPhone 15 doesn't get the better battery, it's very likely that the 16 Pros will. And then the larger main camera sensor, an even larger screen, a wider, like, not a wider, but like a deeper zoom with like a 300 millimeter focal length. There's definitely a lot to look forward to, even if not everything is like necessarily super positive for everybody. Some people might say like, oh, any kind of display improvement sucks. I would much rather have like slimmer bezels and an overall smaller device. Even further zoom will be bad unless we have like adjustable optical zoom, so that we aren't like necessarily constrained to 10x and have like garbage zoom for like 5 and 6x again. So there's a lot to consider. Even with like a better battery, will that increase weight again? Will we like maybe get a lighter iPhone 15 Pro because of a titanium chassis, but then the 16 Pro will have like much larger battery capacity with like the new stack battery, but now also will be even heavier potentially than like the 14 Pro Max. So there's a lot to balance out here. I do not think that you should wait unless you have like some very explicit like needs in terms of like, oh, I absolutely need like every like 10th of an inch of camera sensor size, and before that I won't upgrade. Again, it's still a smartphone. You're still likely doing like professional photography on an actual real like DSLR or like a mirrorless camera. But yeah, this is basically what we have right now, and to me it's pretty exciting. I am a little bummed by the potential of delays, especially since I plan to upgrade my 13 Pro Max to the 15 Pro Max, but I do hope that I can still get the phone relatively early, review it for you, and then keep my coverage going. So this video was not quite as long as I feared it might get. I do have to get going. I will try to provide basically time stamps in the description either today or very early tomorrow whenever I get to like review the video. Thank you all so much for your recent support. We've had like the last video took a while to get going, but it's now at 100 views. The second to last video definitely got going, is now at almost 1,000 views, and then we have like 250 350 view videos, which for a small channel like mine definitely is very, very positive. I still want to encourage you all to subscribe, to like, to comment, to share. This isn't just me asking that for like the YouTube algorithm. I really want to grow our community. Our last video was phenomenal, where we had like a lot of people joining in the chat, asking questions, giving suggestions. So, and this is definitely what I want to keep going. But with that being said, I see you guys next time.